Welcome, everybody. I'm Chad Koulis. I'm Executive Director of the Midway Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for being with us today in what I'm hoping is going to be our last virtual economic development meeting. After this, we will be back to being in person beginning on August 24th, where we're going to be learning about innovative housing happening, including at yard homes, where they build what's called accessory dwelling units. I'm Chad Koulis, like I mentioned, and a reminder, if you are not speaking, to please put yourself on mute. There's also the chat feature if you have any questions. It's a really interesting presentation today. Our Reimagine Midway Task Force actually had the presentation a few months ago. This is a really great guiding plan that has involvement with a lot of community partners and is going to need to continue being involved with community partners and getting their support. So I'm going to quickly do introductions of our two speakers today, and then they'll take over the program. We have from the Center for Economic Inclusion, we have Devana Pittman. She's the Director of Inclusive Growth. Devana leads the center's efforts to create broad, measurable, shared accountability among public, local, regional, and statewide leaders and policymakers by equipping leaders and agencies with the knowledge, tools, and resources needed to close racial wealth gaps and accelerate inclusive economic competitiveness through racially equitable workforce, land use, economic development, housing, transportation, and infrastructure policies and investments. And then we also have Martha Faust. Martha is Redevelopment Manager with Ramsey County's Department of Community and Economic Development. Her role is to facilitate real estate development projects and initiatives with the county. She currently serves as the county's lead on a 427-acre suburban redevelopment project on the former Superfund site and supports redevelopment of a 5-acre site along the Mississippi River in downtown St. Paul. And Martha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you so much to the committee for inviting Devana and I to talk to you today about the county's economic competitiveness and inclusion plan. We're going to walk you through, this is really going to be a speed overview through a plan that, I think really deserves your attention. And there's more to the plan than we can possibly cover, but our goal today is to help kind of ground you on the context for why the county decided to create such a plan. And then it's been a couple of months since that plan was blessed by our county board, and we already kind of have some implementation progress that we can talk about. So, and thank you again to Devana for being here to co-present. So let's see, we're going to get to a link with the plan so that you can peruse it at your leisure. But first, just to talk about why this plan now. There were really 3 key reasons. The first was needing a comprehensive and holistic economic development strategy for community and economic development. We didn't have a director for 14 years, as you can imagine. That really kind of limits your ability to be able to plan comprehensively for the future. And additionally, we needed updated data analysis to understand Ramsey County's economy within the region in the context of the current affordable housing crisis that predated COVID. The county was really seeking to define its unique role. Our intent is not to duplicate the role of the state or cities, but rather for us to identify the gaps and to understand the unique ways that the county could play a role in supporting housing creation, wealth building, small business development in partnership with community partners. And then it was imperative to the county to center this effort within the frame of economic inclusion, building on the Ramsey County's board's longstanding commitment to racial equity. You can see some of the really competent consultants that we had working with us on this plan. And there at the bottom of the slide is a link to where you can find the plan. Let me copy that, get that into chat on the county's webpage. And so grateful to have CEI with us. They really are, as you all know, a leader in this space in terms of helping organizations to be able to center equity and really help us be able to collectively move the needle forward on some of the really difficult racial disparities that we have in our community. We also worked with Fourth Economy out of Pittsburgh. They did housing and economic analysis together with MZ Strategies. And then NAO Partners helped with community engagement. And then finally, Urban 3 is out of Asheville, North Carolina, and they did a property value analysis and comparative analysis as well. Okay. Let's see. Just touching on some of the highlights of really the special urgency that we faced in this process related to the COVID pandemic. When we were starting this process, COVID was not really a thing yet, but very rapidly, obviously it brought profound economic impacts and increased disparities, as well as made the idea of in-person engagement really challenging. Chad, I know you served on our steering committee. I think we had at least 1 or 2 kickoff meetings in person and then quickly had to shift to Zoom, as we all did throughout our personal and work lives. Additionally, the killing of George Floyd really brought special kind of poignancy to the idea that we can and must do better. We can't continue to admire the problems that we have around racial disparities, but to really be honest and have some difficult conversations. The county's mission is building a county economy where all are valued and can thrive. And that is central to all of this work. There's, throughout this process, this presentation, you'll see some key statistics. I'm not going to go into them in depth, but we really want to stress that the wage gap, the wealth gap, and the need for workers are critical pieces of having a competitive and functioning economy. It's true at the state level, regionally, and certainly within Ramsey County. And those pieces, again, were really what helped guide this work. I mentioned housing, and we know that we are not keeping pace with the metro area of the state or the US rate in terms of cost burdened households, also in terms of BIPOC business creation. So there's some areas where it's troubling. So for example, just talking about populations that, when we talk about deeply affordable housing units, you see that at the end of the slide, sometimes we can get lost in definitions. So most of our Black, Latino, Asian, and Indigenous 4-person households, they're earning less than $51,000 a year, which equates to about 50% of the area median income. And they're most likely to be cost burdened as renters and homeowners. Ramsey County has identified our biggest need as being affordable units at 30% of AMI. So that is that deepest level of affordability requiring the largest subsidy. And we also identified through this process a need for more rental units with 2 or more bedrooms to accommodate families. I have a lot more text on this slide, but just in the interest of keeping pace with time, I'm going to keep moving. So I'm going to, what all of our analysis led to was a plan that has strategies in basically 2 different buckets. The first is regarding ensuring place-based inclusion and creating resilient and equitable communities. The second is around fostering economic competitiveness, innovation, and transformation. So I'm going to take the first area, and then Devana will take the second. This plan evolved to create these 2 areas of policies to help move the county forward, building on our existing mission and goals and commitment to racial equity. Among our county's goals are cultivating economic prosperity and investing in neighborhoods with concentrated financial poverty, and also in enhancing access to opportunity and mobility for all residents and businesses. When we do this, it will help us lead to fiscal health, inclusive wealth building, and economic resilience. I'm going to talk for just another moment about housing. I realize I'm kind of bouncing around here, but what are the things that I think are important? Getting into a lot of jargon here. I don't know how many people on the call are familiar with the concept of NOAA, or naturally occurring affordable housing. These are housing units that are just, they tend to be in older buildings. So there's no government subsidy. They are not getting tax credits or part of a TIF district, or any special government assistance in order for them to be affordable to average renters. And you can see that we are fortunate within Ramsey County to have quite a good number of AMI units, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000. And those, in some cases, some of those dwellings are really in need of rehab. But the ones that are, in better shape, unfortunately, are very attractive targets for the private equity market and outside investors to acquire those properties and put in some upgrades and then increase the rents. I've heard developers say that, frankly, there's less risk involved in acquiring an older building that exists, rather than trying to navigate the permitting and getting government approvals process to build new. So if we lose any number of these units, it just exacerbates the housing crisis further. And so we wanted to at least have a sense of where is that inventory, and then it helped us lead to some of the strategies in the plan to be able to preserve and maintain the affordability of these units. And I did touch on this previously. You can see the kind of racial and ethnicity breakdown of where our cost burdened households are. And again, you're seeing at those lower levels of AMI, that's, both 50% and below and 30% of below, that is where the need is more acute. And this information is based on an analysis of the eviction lab from Ramsey County from 2000 to 2016. And yeah, I could say more about that as well, but I will move on. And I do want to take a moment to talk about the racial component of how we got to where we are today. So most folks on this call, I'm going to guess, at least have some passing familiarity with the concept of redlining or racial covenants. We know the history of the Rondo neighborhood and how government policy in choosing where to site the interstate system led to the intentional destruction of the Rondo neighborhood and displacement of many families, which took away for a lot of families what is the key source of wealth building in America, which is property ownership. And so we know that prior to 1968, the Fair Housing Act, there were no laws that protected non-white populations from discriminatory practices in housing and commercial markets. The Fair Housing Act came along in 1968 that sort of helped stem the tide, but it certainly did not eliminate racial bias in lending practices, appraisals. I mean, there's just more and more data that's coming out about this. And these redlining maps are no longer legal. Racial covenants are no longer legal, but they do exist. I'm a Highland Park, St. Paul homeowner, and through the Mapping Prejudice project that's going on in Ramsey County, I found out that I have a historic racial covenant on my property, which is, just extremely sobering to think about all of the history that led to that. So I will just note that Mapping Prejudice is in the process of finalizing a map of racial covenants in Ramsey County, and I think they're anticipating releasing that map this fall. So that we're starting to get a little bit astray from this plan, but this is obviously a cornerstone piece of history when we talk about addressing racial disparities, and so want to make sure that we do reference that. And then another big topic that won't be able to do justice to, but want to just note briefly, which is the county's economic inclusion plan and the work of Urban 3 on mapping fiscal health. And this is a 3D property valuation map that Urban 3 created for the county. So the higher the spikes on this map, the higher density, it corresponds with density and value, property value per acre. And this process, the mapping that Urban 3 did, helped us realize that there's some real opportunities in areas, especially in suburban Ramsey County, but we're looking here at the Midway, and y'all can feel good about essentially what is the result of good urban planning over decades, and kind of greater densities concentrated along our transit corridors, and that can help yield more housing and business choices, and producing a more resilient and productive financial outlook for cities in the county. So the link that I gave you earlier, if you go to that page, there's a whole analysis that Urban 3 did in an interactive map that I think you'll find really interesting. Okay, so now I'm going to talk very briefly about strategies. I mentioned that I am doing the first set, and then Devana the second set. So I'll go into strategy 1, which is, as it states, about preserving and increasing the supply of rental housing units for our lowest income residents. I'm not going to read all these, and this is even a distillation of more concrete policy language, but this is a set of actions that the county intends to take starting really now, but through 2025. So it's a fairly short-term plan. And the biggest piece is activating the county's HRA levy authority, which would establish a dedicated fund of approximately $11 million a year to help support new affordable housing development. And you can see there's targeting resources towards the NOAA units that I mentioned earlier, trying to incentivize multifamily housing in transit corridors, and so on. So this is housing, housing, housing. The next strategy also is about expanding affordable home ownership opportunities and housing stability for communities that have experienced historic wealth extraction. So more efforts here, partly doing better coordination with our partners. Some of it is not rocket science. It simply can be about improving access to housing information for non-English speakers, helping tenants understand energy costs, also trying to invest more resources into energy efficiency programs that helps us achieve or work towards climate resilience, and driving down costs both for renters and for property owners. And we will be working with the city of St. Paul, looking at displacement policies. So there's a lot for us to do in this area. The third strategy area is about fostering inclusive economic development within county transit and key commercial corridors. And this is really thinking about needs for people. And again, thinking about elevating key corridors for housing and jobs. And yeah, I mean, a lot of my work is going to be focused in this area in conjunction with our housing work group, and looking again at corridors is really that area of connectivity. I don't have to preach to this group about corridors. You understand the University Avenue selling, the major corridors within the Midway, but really trying to have strategic alignment of resources to where there is existing transit and future transit is planned. And then the last set of actions, there we go, relates to equitable site development and challenging the county to consider our role in partnership with localities to remove barriers to access to housing and jobs for all of our residents. So you can see, oh, I see a typo. Whoops, sorry about that. That would be me. Working on an equitable development framework for Ramsey County. I'm actually working on this now. It's an internal document that'll help staff be able to evaluate development and property disposal decisions. I mean, we tend not to be a developer, and we don't have control over zoning. But when we are considering selling county-owned land or buildings, to have kind of an equity framework to help guide that decision making. And then really acting as a champion and a leader with our city partners on some of the innovations that can help improve both their fiscal outlook, but also to achieve goals related to equity. Looking at removing exclusionary housing barriers, rethinking parking, it kind of runs the gamut. So I could say more. I'm excited to talk with you all more, but I want to be judicious with time. And so I will turn the microphone over to Devana.
Thank you, Martha. I'm going to try my best to be just as succinct as Martha. She always does an excellent job with her piece. I'm honored to be here with you all today. The center is extremely proud to have partnered with Ramsey County to increase economic growth and competitiveness by placing racial equity and inclusion at the center. The plan really allows us to be intentional about the strategies, including the ones that Martha mentioned, that will move Ramsey County forward in a way that is competitive, inclusive, and equitable. And so these outcomes will help us to ensure that prosperity happens for everyone. In addition, the plan is very much in line with the center's mission to strengthen the Minneapolis-St. Paul region's civic infrastructure. And what this really is about is collective capacity to disrupt systems and influence market forces. I'm sure you've heard Tawana say this over and over again. The plan will accelerate county growth and racial wealth equity by centering Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian folks in the housing, business, and workforce development. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go deeper into my part. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to touch on the next 5 to 8 strategies, but first want to center the conversation and remind you all that we have some of the most amazing organizations right here in our backyard: 3M, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and many others. The county's tech capacity is growing. Also, that includes new jobs and diversifying the economy. However, the most growth that we've seen The most growth is seen in small firms, and we want to start by addressing some of the economic impacts of COVID-19. And in order to do that, Ramsey must work alongside cities, local, and regional partners to ensure that small businesses have adequate resources to grow, to retain good talent, and to also produce new businesses. Despite the growth that we've seen, Black, Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous businesses lack equitable investment. And in order to realize that growth potential of business starts, Ramsey will need to support the establishment and security of those businesses. Next slide, please. We know that there are many opportunities to enhance business partnerships and support for small businesses. Here, we just have some of the current conditions. You can glance through those. Again, I'm not going to read it all to you, but just want to bring some things to your attention. For example, there were 12,815 continued unemployment insurance claims in October of 2020. That includes COVID-19 related job losses, which is 3 times the number for January 2020. One of the things that we're thinking about is expanding the Open to Business program to accelerate entrepreneurship for immigrant populations, which we know is really important. We found that Ramsey County would need 500 more minority-owned businesses to match the U.S. ownership rate. And if Ramsey County seeded each of those businesses with $5,000, it will cost about $2.5 million per year, or $7.5 million at $15,000 each. Next slide, please. This live work analysis is just an interesting fact, and it really speaks to more people work in Ramsey County than those who live in Ramsey. And I have to say, I've worked in Hennepin County and now I work in Ramsey, and I love it. Um, Ramsey County has a lower percentage of Black and Asian residents with a bachelor's degree compared to Minnesota and the United States, which means that 20% of Black and 30% of Asian residents in the county have a bachelor's degree or higher, and nearly 50% of white non-Hispanic Ramsey County residents have a bachelor's degree. So we believe that if we have targets in place, we'll be able to kind of focus on what closing these gaps means. Closing the gap would mean that $2.3 billion in annual earnings for Ramsey County would mean $2.3 billion in annual earnings for Ramsey, especially residents who are Black, Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous. This would really, really set us up to be more competitive. Next slide, please. Again, we must be competitive in order to ensure adequate growth of Ramsey. That means our workforce has to be strong and it has to be vibrant. I'm going to quickly go through these strategies, but want to mention that in order to meet the defined needs and to advance opportunities for Ramsey County businesses and residents, the next 4 strategies are prioritized. I'm going to speak about those and, like I said before, break down an abbreviated version of each. And I think Martha has already posted the link for further review. Um, in the essence of time, I'm going to be summarizing in a way that does not bring justice to the plan, the recommended actions, or most importantly, the hard work that went into pulling this plan together. Next slide, please. Strategy 5, sustain and accelerate workforce recovery programs. There are a few things that we can do to make a difference in our workforce recovery in terms of efforts to foster racial inclusion and equity for Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and people of color. To name a few, working in partnership with the Workforce Innovation Board to evaluate the impacts of workforce-related CARES Act investments, assisting workforce solutions to address targeted vulnerable populations, including previously incarcerated adults. Also supporting Ramsey County to hire, retain, and promote those populations in each department and at every level. Excuse me, and we can do that in pursuit of a workforce that mirrors the county's population, the county's very diverse population. We can also do that by partnering with community-based organizations to prepare and equip employers in growth sectors to mitigate and dismantle racism and pilot new models for inclusive, equitable hiring, retention, and advancement, specifically to close racial wealth gaps. I'm going to talk a little bit about that on my last slide about how we're already working to do some of those things. Next slide, please. Oh, you're there. Strategy 6. Um, develop pathways to entrepreneurship and Black, Latinx, and Indigenous business ownership. Again, we know that it's very important that we continue to encourage, inspire, and empower folks to start businesses. And we think there's a growth opportunity here that hasn't been recognized, and it is advantageous to really focus on the lending gap. Looking at private sector investments, lending practices, and spending, there's a purchasing power that exists in Ramsey County that can be better aligned. A few ways to do that is by partnering with community leaders to influence and leverage private sector investments, to engage in efforts to scale effectively and equitably, and to develop joint investments. Among a few, there were so many recommendations that came out of this piece. Next slide, please. Strategy 7 is to attract and grow high wage industry and innovation in technology, advanced manufacturing, and life sciences. In order to attract high wage industry and lead with the spirit of innovation, the county had to set lofty goals and recommendations. This means increasing support for businesses and implementing new and unique ways to support the growth that we want to see in Ramsey County. The plan seeks to transform the Ramsey County business ecosystem by igniting it with resources and support, and by engaging partners and large businesses in these discussions. The metrics within the plan demonstrate the impacts that the plan is having and the impacts that the plan will have as a result of efforts to support business attraction and growth. Next slide, please. My last and final slide. Sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses today. Strategy 8, to strengthen business retention and expansion, infrastructure to support communities. Strategy 8 really seeks to strengthen and expand infrastructure. And some of the tactical ideas here really speak to the business retention and expansion and enlarging networks that are already in place. Those business advisors, and really getting to the point of advocating for small businesses in an equitable manner and providing those businesses with culturally specific technical assistance and potential access to financial resources, which we know is very important. Finally, the last thing that I'm going to touch on is an exciting opportunity for Ramsey County small businesses. Some of you may have heard about the inclusive workforce um, cohort, which we've already started with the launching of info sessions. And this is specifically related to the implementation of the workforce development recommendations. I'm going to post a link in the comment section. But just a little bit about the cohort, if I can find it here. The cohort is going to be open to businesses, 20 businesses of under 100 employees. We are going to provide them with resources um, for racially economic growth. And we're really going to talk about racial equity. And one of the first conversations that we're going to have is talking about the imperatives of being a racially equitable and inclusive workforce and why that is really good for business. So I think I cannot find my document here. Here we go. The info sessions are going to be held, what's today's date? I'm so scatterbrained today. Thursday, July 29th from 10 to 10:45. We hosted one last week on July 22nd. So lots of information forthcoming about that. You have to be located in Ramsey County. It is free to any businesses. There is an application process, but very simple. I think there's about 3 to 5 questions that businesses will answer. And you have to commit to attending all 10 sessions and submitting a very simple project at the end of the cohort. So I'm open to answering any questions about this. But with that, I am going to pass it back over to Martha.
Thank you, Devonna. I'm just putting up an acknowledgement slide very briefly to recognize some of the folks that participated on the steering committee, but I mean, we really had hundreds of different folks at the table in one way or another, from kind of topic area working groups to community circles. We had one commissioner-run town hall on affordable housing in suburban Ramsey County, surveys and the like. So really, we appreciate so much the perspectives and contributions of many community members in helping shape this plan. I mentioned kind of moving into implementation, moving from vision to reality. And so this is just kind of touching on some of the pieces. Obviously, there's federal resources that are unique thanks to the American Rescue Plan and CARES, which went more towards small business, just kind of stabilizing people in the height of the COVID crisis. And the Housing Redevelopment Authority levy was adopted by all communities in Ramsey County with the exception of North St. Paul. And so that will be activated in January of next year. And then, you know, together with community partners, we're building programs, partnerships, pilot projects, very much in concert with our city partners to understand and make sure that whatever we're rolling out is responsive to community needs and that we can right size and fine tune along the way as needed. And then lastly, just kind of a question that comes up frequently is, you know, how can you partner with us? How can the Midway Chamber be a partner to the county as this plan rolls out over the next few years? And I guess, you know, we don't have, we don't want to speak on behalf of your needs. You are most attuned to what your organization's needs are and priorities. So I guess as you walk through this plan with us, and hopefully you'll have the chance to read the full plan via the link that we provided, you know, see where are the places where you feel like the Midway Chamber's priorities most closely align. I mean, it might be around small business growth or entrepreneurship initiatives, the inclusive workplaces initiative that Devana just mentioned, workforce housing or other areas. So, you know, find the areas that most connect to things that you're already working on or where your identified priorities are, and get in touch with us and let us know how we can work together. That's we are still a very small team, and so you know, we're easy to reach. We want to hear from you. We want to be engaged with you in conversation so that this isn't just a one-time presentation, but it's really the beginning of a longer-term conversation. So I want to say thank you on behalf of Devana and I to Chad and the entire chamber for inviting us to be able to present to you today. And we'll turn it back over to you, Chad.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks, Devana. Again, if people have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll start off with a question. This is a housing one by Tom Molnar, asking if you could please speak to how increasing property taxes on apartment owners helps keep affordable housing. He has an example of one of the buildings that they manage. Property taxes raised over 42% over 3 years. All the units fall around the 60% AMI. Property taxes, he says, can't be sustained without increasing rents or buildings quality declines. He also would ask to speak on accessible parking and how it can help social mobility and decrease expenses for property owners. The city eliminated 42 convenient parking spaces. Since then, he said their turnover rate at that building went from 25% to 33%, and then 50% for 2 years and close to 70% last year. Besides that increasing cost to owners, don't tenants, especially those in affordable housing, need access to parking so they can search for better paying jobs that may not be located nearby?
Great. Well, I thank you, Chad, and thank you, Thomas. I can jump into that first. It sounds like you have some very specific personal examples that are the basis of what you're citing, and certainly, you know, a spike in property tax increases is something that property owners are going to be very sensitive to. I'm here today on behalf of Community and Economic Development. So for tax pieces, I really wish I had someone from our property tax assessment department that can talk to you in more detail about the various kind of levers. I know that the county held the property tax levy at, you know, 0 increase last year, but that doesn't cover maybe longer term trends that you're seeing. You know, I didn't cite it earlier in the presentation, but one of the reasons for the need for the HRA levy is that Ramsey County is the only county in the 7-county metro that has never levied for affordable housing. And so our board is certainly sensitive to property tax increases on apartment owners and landlords, and how that, and to be very real about how that can be a challenge. At the same time, we are trying to manage the needs for you know, residents and renters and so on to not be cost burdened. And by reducing the cost of housing for renters, it's going to help people be able to from needing other county services. And we're trying to help move folks up the wealth ladder so that they are less reliant on those kind of more immediate social services and or becoming unsheltered. Your points are completely valid, and I appreciate you expressing it. We are just trying to right size housing infrastructure county-wide so that our businesses are going to be better able to find enough workers. And we are just not keeping pace. So it really creates sort of a difficult situation. But our board is extremely thoughtful about understanding that opportunity. And then the second question, and so I'm just probably, we could have an hour-long conversation just on that question alone. On accessible parking, I'm not trying to pass the buck. That really is, the county does not have a role in establishing parking standards. I'm curious where that is occurring. It might be around University Avenue. Certainly there's been a lot of redevelopment there. And that is, absolutely a legitimate and real challenge. And so I maybe don't have an answer for you on that is what you're wanting to hear. We are trying to understand like the physical inventory of the county in terms of parking and, people's mobility needs and preferences, and try to right size that. And that's a little more acute in a place where land is at a premium. So that's my quick answer that maybe doesn't leave you fully satisfied.
Thanks for that. And I'll follow up with Tom as well, just to make sure if he has any follow-up questions or concerns on that. Martha, you had mentioned historic racial covenant, and you did some research in where you live in Highland Park. If somebody wants to learn more about that, particularly with where they live, where can they find information?
Oh, great question, Chad. I'm going to see if I can quickly navigate to where I have saved that map, the Mapping Prejudice preliminary map. Shoot, I'm not seeing it. I'm gonna keep digging around. One way to do it is just to Google University of Minnesota Mapping Prejudice. It's a project of the University of Minnesota. They've done all of Hennepin County, and they have a really incredible like time lapse where you can see how racial covenants unfolded in Hennepin County over time. And I assume they will be doing the same for Ramsey County. Yeah, shoot. Oh, wait, you know what? I just found it. I can't remember what I had. So there's a preliminary map that's out that doesn't have all of the information that folks might be looking for, but it gives you kind of a, hopefully that's right. It gives you sort of a, it's by parcel, but it doesn't have like property address information. But if you can kind of use your information to be able to do that, then I'm going to give you a link to the Ramsey County Recorder's Office. I gotta find that, but I'll put it in chat during this discussion. Typically, there's a cost to even search their files, but they have waived that fee temporarily, so you don't need like a subscription. And you can go in, as long as you know your property description, lot number, and block number, you can look it up and see the full history of any actions. And so I just kind of click through. I'm only the second owner of my property, which was built in 1948, and I was able to see a restriction that was put on when the land was subdivided and platted back in 1929, I think. So it really depends on where you're located in Ramsey County and when that might have occurred. But those racial covenants were most prolific from like the 20s to the 1950s. Surprisingly, Mapping Prejudice found there weren't a lot of houses on Summit Avenue that had a racial covenant, and it's because they were older before that practice kind of came into play. Yeah, so anyway, that's a whole nother exciting topic. Let me see if I can find that link though for folks to be able to do their own research.
Thanks, Martha. As I mentioned earlier, Martha and Devana had presented at a Reimagine Midway task force, and it was only a few months ago, but trying to think about what are the differences that have happened, between then and now, or what are the differences that maybe our members or businesses are interested in compared to when the study was officially completed. And I think one of the big ones right now is we're looking at so many employers that are having a hard time finding employees. The county, in conjunction with our partnership with Midway Chamber, we had done a job fair at the end of June over by Allianz Field. Martha or Devana, any insight you would have on what we can be doing to help our employers find employees?
Devana, do you want to jump in? I know you're working with Workforce Solutions, CEI is right now on some of these issues.
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is really taking a look at your net, where you dropping the net, what new places can you start to look for folks. We know that in September, we're going to start to see a lot of changes in our communities with the unemployment policies and things that are going to be changing, and people are going to be looking for work. But, in the essence of time, without really getting into too much other things, I think businesses have to consider their nets, and where can they expand their nets to find folks, and how can they connect with other community organizations to reach those folks.
Chad, I feel like this, topic really, it would be great, given the limited time, for folks to invite Ling Becker back. I'm sure she's probably presented before, and she's absolutely a font of ideas and kind of can talk about the latest in partnerships and, trying to create that pipeline. And we know we're hearing that all over, that finding access to workers is challenging.
Yeah, great suggestion, Martha. We do have time for another question or two if anybody has any. At this point, if you want to put it in chat, or if you just want to unmute yourself, introduce yourself and ask it, we would have time for one or two more questions potentially. Otherwise, I think the information that you put in the links is going to be helpful for us to be able to look at. The plan itself is really interesting. And there's, another link here for the Workforce Solutions Employer or Services. Great. It's an interesting plan. I guess one kind of final maybe question about it. What are the next steps for the plan? Who is in charge of making sure that everything happens, or to the best of our abilities? Is this something that gets presented to the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners on a somewhat regular basis? Tell us how the plan continues to live.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Obviously, we don't want to go through this effort and have it be kind of empty. So breathing life in this and keeping it at the forefront is, it really is the roadmap for community and economic development and our partners. And so we have had, there's going to be a lot of actions at the county board level related to investments in affordable housing for next year. And passage of the HRA was critical. ARP funds, understanding the opportunity with ARP funds for to help move county goals on some of those longer range investments. So really it's trying to match the resources that are available and try to achieve sort of the lowest hanging fruit, even though the plan does have kind of annual priorities over between 2022 and 2025. We are going to help us track progress in a way that is transparent to the public. We'll be building a kind of dashboard where we can, I'm envisioning something that's like a one-page thing where you can click on the plan and then you can see where are we in terms of progress and implementation, and then links to more resources. I don't exactly know the timeline on that, but I think the intention is to have something in place this fall. And we will be also likely doing probably an annual report to our board. We are just right now moving from kind of finalizing the plan into early stages of implementation, but would certainly be happy to come back and talk to the chamber at any point and give you a progress check. You want to hear from us in the spring. Where are you at? Help hold us accountable. We want to be engaged with all of our community partners.
Great. You made me think of one other question. You mentioned the America Rescue Plan, and both the city and the county received quite a bit of funding for that. And I'm wondering if you can just enlighten us a little bit on what that process is for how to decide where those funds are going to be distributed. You're on mute right now.
Oh, let me see if I can pull that up. I want to shoot. I've got a visual. How can I do that? Let's see if I can pull that up. The county manager had made a slide that really does better than I could. Yeah, there it is. Yay. Of kind of priorities. So, CARES Act funding was really focused on tier 1, COVID response, including small business response, rental assistance. And the goal, what our board has said, is to try to focus as much of those ARP resources as possible towards the tier 5, the big swings. And this is a graphic from the American Rescue Plan itself. So that, we're going through our budget process now, but that's kind of the overarching vision is, can we take advantage and leverage these one-time significant resources to help us really move the ball forward on longer term while having sensitivity and balance for some of the immediate relief pieces. So I don't have dollar amounts yet in terms of like where we are there, but we are very much in the middle of all that budget discussion. And I think you'll see more coming out about that in the next few months. I hope that's helpful to kind of just kind of capture that briefly.
Great. And if there's any opportunities for, community input, let us know and we can pass that along to our members as well. Well, that puts us right about 1 o'clock. So thank you very much to Devana and Martha for joining us today. This is recorded, so you can review it later. As I mentioned at the beginning, our next economic development event is August 24th on innovative housing, and hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.